When you're a health policy student, you will learn the United States has been in a debate over universal health care through multiple presidencies and for more than 60 years. Many of you will even learn that when President Harry Truman was president, he suggested a plan which in the U.S. today would have been called Medicare for All. And had it been enacted in the late 1940s, would have been before the Canadian Health Plan. And people would have pointed to the United States as the model for Canada and other countries. But since those debates, it's been rejected every single time. And we entered into the sixth debate since World War II about whether or not we should do this. And it really began in the Democratic primaries with then Barack Obama and then Hillary Clinton. And for those, again, from other countries, they actually were in the same political party running against each other for the presidency. And this debate sort of got it much broader in the American discussion again. The issue, should we have a universal coverage plan? And after President Obama was enacted, he picked as his model, as did the majority party in the Congress, a plan that was developed in Massachusetts with a Republican governor and a Democratic legislature, and it was the frame for part of the bill. The problem is that as the debate went on, it turned out there were huge divisions. After 60 years, so many talks, so many speeches over this issue. So let me give you just some complete perspective from a public opinion point of view. When Medicare, our program for retirees who were seniors over age 65, was enacted, it was very controversial, but actually not among the American public. 61% supported the time, the bill, the time it was enacted. When the Massachusetts Universal Health Care, which was in some sense the model for the President and Democratic proposal, Affordable Care Act, it was 61% again. That doesn't mean there was not huge opposition, huge problems, but it had this wind of public support. The so-called Affordable Care Act, and if I'm parts in this country, just for those of you who are not familiar, in general, if I want to hint that I have a negative view, I call Obamacare, even though the president now uses it in his own name. If I really am favorable to it, I call it closer to its actual name, which is the Affordable Care Act. But when that bill was enacted, it had 40% public support. It did not capture the broad winds that the other two bills had done. And that is one of the factors that when I arrived in the United States and the president said, we have now passed the milestone, we are here, we're moving on, you'll suddenly pick up political controversy aiming for the next election. And so the recent polls are not that very different from what we saw in late December. That is, even though the legislation is here, it's in place, this was done at 3 years, the current polls are not very different, most Americans don't fully approve of this law. To tie back the beginning of our talk, because this is not about the Affordable Care Act, it's about public opinion and politics. In U.S. politics, if you have a bill that isn't popular after a number of years, what happens is the minority party starts to go after it. They find this as a focus for their criticism. If it is popular, if the country rallies around it, then you really, as a political figure running for the legislature, running for the Congress, have to be very, very wary of attacking things that people are very supportive of. In this case, the bill remains controversial for this, and there are many polls on this, but I think this is the best summary of what does the public want done with this law? Well, first is the majority do not want the whole bill repealed. And so if I'm listening to CNN News at night, I'm suddenly listening to a politician say, repeal it. We have to repeal it. At the other, I'm listening to the president say, we have to implement it as it is. Yes, we'll fix it someday. Let's do this. It turns out neither is exactly the popular position. The popular position is some mix between scaling it back and getting rid of it, or scaling it back and moving ahead. So we're going to enter the 2014 election, and the oddity as you listen to the candidates is that the Democrats are mostly going to say we have to go ahead with what we have, and it's become a success. And the Republicans are going to talk about repealing it. And the middle, if you were actually just selling a product, the middle is, yeah, let's move ahead, but it should be scaled back, and some things are very unpopular, and it will affect where it is. Well, this is the other point I made, is it is not important that public opinion exists on an issue like this unless it affects elections. And so here's a thing. If I heard that a candidate supported this bill, 2010 bill, you read the whole description of what the name of the bill is, would you more likely support the candidate in 2014, or more likely oppose it, or doesn't make a difference? And what you see is, of course, voters are split, but more at the moment actually could oppose a candidate than favor it. And so this is how public opinion starts to have a feeling. So let's back up. We have more frequent elections than any other country. As a result of that, we have to pay attention to the public. The public opinion only matters if it, at the end of the day, affects opinions or really affects the priorities of public officials. It affects opinions of public officials if it affects the vote of people every 2 years. And so this legislation will be controversial in this coming election, because not only is there a division over if it's popular or not, but people actually say, I'm going to vote against somebody or vote for them. And so that makes this very important. But this is very unusual between countries. Rarely would you have a frequent election where a major healthcare legislation would suddenly be up and it would affect the parliamentary election. There are a small number of cases, but generally it doesn't. But in the United States, in both state and federal elections, these issues are there, and they can shape votes. And in the United States, in many elections, older people vote more frequently than younger people. This is very hard if you teach students, because the students we have are really very fired up about the importance of all these issues. But across the country, it turns out that older people vote more frequently than younger people, and they actually pay more attention to healthcare issues. How could that affect the U.S. health policy? If I get off a plane from another country and I listen to U.S. health policy, I discover it's more focused on older people than almost any other country. There are lots, and you'll, over the next 5 years, huge discussions about Medicare and seniors and long-term care and paying for drugs. That occurs because the frequent elections, older people vote more frequently, they care more about it, it shapes where it is. So we're going to be closing this session, but the key takeaway is U.S. politics is different because there's very frequent elections. The parties do not agree on the role of government. For that, public opinion on certain issues is very powerful in driving the views of the parties and the outcome of elections. And that makes health policy discussions very different than in many other countries.